stunning that he's in politics because he really doesn't like people. My analogy is that it's like becoming Bill Gates without liking computers. Someone who doesn't like people isn't going to seek out people for informal meetings. However, over the years of coddling and social promotions, Obama has come to believe he is actually quite talented. President Obama famously once said, and I quote, "I think I'm a better speechwriter than my speechwriters. I know more about policies on any particular issue than my policy directors. And I'll tell you right now that I'm going to think I'm a better political director than my political director." That, friends, is about as comprehensive a description of narcissism and arrogance as any I've seen. Ms. Brooks offers another point. Number 5, get a backbone. He came into office with a mandate and a Democratic control of both houses of Congress. Had he been willing to use some political capital and twist a few arms on the Hill, in those early months Guantanamo would be closed, and the United States might have a more coherent approach to national security budgeting. But on these and other issues, the president backed off at the first sign of congressional resistance, apparently deciding, presumably on the advice of his campaign aides, who already populated his national security staff. Let that waft in the air for a second. Advice of campaign aides who had already populated his national security staff, that these issues were political losers. Of course, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. The issues became losers because the White House abandoned them. Ultimately, Congress began to view him as weak, a man who wouldn't push them very hard. As a result, Congress pushed back hard on everything, including health care, economic stimulus, and regulation of the financial industry, and Obama was forced to live with watered-down legislation across the board. That I don't agree with because, quite frankly, I don't think Congress pushed back hard on anything. But that's my opinion. And then lastly, Ms. Brooks points out, get rid of the jerks. Insiders say that McDonough and Donnellan can barely stand each other, contradicting each other publicly so often that no one's ever sure who really speaks for the president. Both men are also famously rude to colleagues. It's a rare individual who hasn't been screamed at by one or the other. The nastiness demoralizes everyone and sends the message that rudeness and infighting are acceptable. My only question to that is whether or not that is a byproduct of the leadership that these people may be emulating. Close out this commentary from Red State. A fish rots from the head down. When one looks at both Obamas and their inner circle, one cannot help but notice the near universal qualities of overweening ego and unrequited sense of entitlement. As they say, A's hire A's, and B's hire C's. Heaven alone knows what C's and D's hire. Should Mitt Romney win in November, he will be faced with a laundry list of imminent crises. Not the least among them is a foreign policy that has been burned and plowed with salt. Some commentary on the Obama foreign policy. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the CB Media Network. Stick with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
This is not a message of happiness or reassurance. It is a crisis of confidence. The productivity of American workers is naturally dropping.
We aren't out there hungry, selling America. We've been a little bit lazy, I think, over the last couple of decades.
The symptoms of this crisis and the American spirit are all around us.
We've lost our ambition, our our imagination.
You go to a bank and you use an ATM. You don't go to a bank teller.
The country that had gotten a little soft.
Change cannot happen overnight. What can we do? We've been a little bit lazy.
I was in chronic pain, and my family struggling to make ends meet, food and gas prices going up, even keeping my job was iffy.
Then I learned about a new miracle drug made in Washington, D.C. Spenditol. Spenditol is Washington's answer to all the painful problems Americans face. How to borrow $800 billion for a stimulus that didn't create jobs or fix the economy? Spenditol.
Spenditol is not for everyone. Side effects may include a mountain of government debt piled on our kids, a sudden loss of freedoms, higher prices for everything, leaving our kids a lesser America than we had. Ask your doctor or congressman if your conscience is strong enough for Spenditol.
And it's so popular in Washington, we have to import trillions more of it from China. Spenditol makes you feel better now and pushes off the really bad stuff till later, for them to deal with.
Call the White House and Congress. Tell them, stop spending it all.
In the last few years, America's been knocked down. 23 million people can't find full-time work. And we borrow $4 billion every single day, much of it from China. When someone doesn't get the job done, you gotta hold them accountable. Obama's second term would be a rerun of the first, and our country just couldn't survive that. We need someone who could turn it around fast, and that man is Mitt Romney. There's not much time left, and the future of our country is at stake.
American Crossroads is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Whether you're a Mitt Romney supporter, fan, or otherwise, I just happen to like Clint Eastwood. I thought that his presentation, his speech, his address at the Republican convention was hysterical, and was probably a little too highbrow for the average duck. But anyway, you know, if you recall, Clint Eastwood made an ad that many thought was an endorsement of Barack Obama back in 2008. But here's yet another individual who's come to the realization that what we have is not serving us well. And although it says so in the ad, you've got to hold them accountable. I prefer that he would have used the words he used at the Republican convention. Somebody's not doing the job, you got to let them go. And that's what we're faced with, folks. I want to go back to a point that I made earlier about amidst all of this offensiveness, that the president seems to hold in his disingenuous, nay, his deceptive, all right, the lies he told about the GM bailout. He has tried to position this discussion about GM to try and paint Governor Romney as a cruel, heartless, capitalist pig who merely wanted to shut down the auto industry and make it go away, versus the heroic things that President Obama did to save General Motors, to save the middle class. All that he did to save GM. Well, first of all, and while the president does not do well without a teleprompter, he also doesn't do well when it comes to fact-checking or considering the truth, the veracity of the things that he says. In the debate, he tried to paint Mitt Romney as having said that he wanted to bankrupt GM and to have them go out of business. Again, this is the president demonstrating his ignorance of American bankruptcy law, of American business, and understanding what bankruptcy is. It's actually called reorganization or restructuring. And why that is often the best means for a company to remain viable and in business. And he also doesn't understand or doesn't recall recent history when, rather than bailing out Chrysler back in the 1990s, Chrysler went through bankruptcy, but we guaranteed loans to Chrysler. And what that did, first and foremost, was Chrysler had to go through the pain, and the necessary pain, of restructuring in order to identify and correct the problems that it had. Rather than doing that with GM, and again this time around with Chrysler, we simply threw more money at the problem, and as a result, GM did nothing to correct the necessary, to necessarily correct the problems that caused them to be in trouble in the first place. Now, President Obama has gone out of his way to try and characterize Mitt Romney's position on this incorrectly, because, quite frankly, the American electorate is, by and large, ignorant of what bankruptcy really is and how that works. With the hundreds of millions of dollars that the Obama campaign and his surrogate 527 organizations have run to try and create this Bain Capital monster that simply bought companies, broke them up, tore them apart, sold off their assets, took the money and ran, which is not what Bain Capital does or did when Romney had any affiliation with them. Most people believe that what President Obama did was a good thing because they don't understand what he did. He violated hundreds of years of bankruptcy, existing, settled bankruptcy law. And as a result, the stockholders, the shareholders, the ones who were the source of capital for General Motors, they were put at the end of the line. And at the head of the line came the labor unions. Now, I am one of those people that actually believes that people are, in fact, the most valuable asset a company owns. I should say, a company has. They are the most useful and most valuable resource that a company has. But in exchange for an agreeable salary and some benefits and an opportunity for growth, if those employees are not in fact stockholders, shareholders, they are nothing more than employees. And so what Obama did in effectively nationalizing GM and bailing them out was counterproductive to quote-unquote saving GM. Has GM been saved? I would argue it has not. They are now in just as much trouble as they were before, and we, the taxpayers, stand to lose billions upon billions of dollars. I say all of that just to tee up this thought, and we'll come back on the other side of the break and fully develop that. But Perhaps the federal government.